It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Saint Augustine Sports Information Director, Anthony Jeffries. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, sir. How you doing today, Brandon? Good to see
Doing
you.
good. Can you talk about, of course, how you knew that you wanted to become a sports information director?
Well, this is an interesting story. I started out, I wanted to be a sports reporter. I wanted to be a sports reporter ever since I was in junior high school. So I spent 18 years as a sports reporter. I worked at the News and Record in Greensboro, the News and Observer in Raleigh, the Chapel Hill News, and the Smithfield Herald. And by the time I started working at the Smithfield Herald, I was commuting. I had been commuting to Chapel Hill, and I had been commuting, started commuting to Smithfield, and it was getting tiring. And I was trying to find a way to get back to Raleigh and not have to commute. And just so happened, a friend of mine, her name was Ann Brown. She told me about the position at St. Augustine's University. She said it'll probably be open within a year. So just kind of keep your eye on it. So around May of 2005, the position opened up, and I went ahead and applied for it, and I didn't receive word that I had gotten the position till August, but that's how I ended up getting into sports information. It was mainly because I was ready to, not so much. One thing, it was sports information, so I would still be able to write sports. When I was at the Smithfield Herald, I was there as a news reporter. The job at the Chapel Hill News, I was the sports reporter at Chapel Hill News. The job had been eliminated, but because it was in the News and Observer franchise, McClatchy, I was able to transfer over to the Smithfield Herald, but I was writing news. So between traveling 30 minutes or spend an hour on the road, going 30 minutes there to Smithfield and 30 minutes back, and also writing news, I was ready to make that transition to sports information. I was ready to get back into sports full time.
Can you talk about, of course, what is the day-to-day like as a sports information director?
Man, I'm gonna tell you, Brandon, the day to day is fun. It is, it can be challenging and it can be rewarding. It can be all three in one day, because at most institutions our size, there's usually one sports information director. At schools or universities the size of a North Carolina State or UNC, Duke, there are numerous. There's a sports information director or associate of sports information. The title's a little bit fancier, but there's also numerous assistants. At schools this size, university this size, there's just one. So I cover, when I first was hired at St. Augustine's, I covered 16 sports. Now we're at 12 sports, but I cover each sport. So that's the challenging part of it. The rewarding part of it is when our teams win when our teams win accolades, and when our student athletes win individual accolades, whether it's academic or athletic. That's the rewarding part. I really enjoy seeing our student athletes and our teams excel on both in the classroom and also on the field or on the court. The
That's
fun part is going to the games. I enjoy going to the games. I enjoy doing research on some of the former student athletes. I enjoy the stats part of it, and I also enjoy setting up interviews. And I enjoy watching the interviews and knowing when I watch an interview that it will be on television, on the news, or it'll be in the newspaper. To me, that's gratifying. That's a gratifying feeling knowing I played a part in that. And there are times when we receive national attention, national media attention, and that tops the cake right there. When a university our size, we're Division II HBCU, university our size is able to make national news, man. I mean, that takes the cake right there for me.
That's such amazing. But speaking about, of course, setting up the interviews and stuff, can you talk about a little bit about that process?
Yes, and well, for me, it's a it's a it's just a smooth process in the sense of it helps having a background in print media. A lot of the reporters and videographers, a lot of sports media I'm already familiar with based on my experience, working in print media. So what happens a lot of times, it goes two ways. If a reporter wants to interview a coach or a student athlete, they have to come through the sports information director. They can't go through the coach. Technically, the process is not for them to go through the coach. It go through the sports information director. The sports information director sets up the interview between the coach and the news media. I mean, the sports media. So, for instance, I'll get an email. Let's say I get an email from Brandon Pate, wants to do a story on, let's say, our football coach, Coach Bowser, David Bowser. What I would do is I would go to Coach Bowser's office, who's also the interim athletic director. I would go by his office. I would, first of all, see if he's interested in doing an interview. He'll say, yes, what's a good time to do the interview? And we'll try to finagle the schedule so that both you and Coach Bowser would be free to do the interview. So I would talk to him. I come back and probably email you. You email me, let me know what's a good time for you. I'll probably go back to Coach Bowser and say, hey, Coach, he says 3:30. If 3:30 work for you, he'll be like, yeah, 3:30 will work for me. And I go back and I email you, and and by that time, I'll email you his information, or I'll email him your information. So that way, once we connect, as far as setting the time and the date, then you'll probably send an email saying, hey, now in this day and age with the pandemic, you'll send them an email and say, hey, this is the link to get on. Nice to meet you. And you may send the questions that you want to ask. And that way I'll be out of it then. And then I'll just watch the interview. But that's mainly how I set the interview up. Now, it goes both ways because there are times that I want to pitch stories. We have, interesting stories on our student athletes and coaches. So I may contact Brandon Pate, and I may email you and say, hey, look, I have a student athlete, it does this, it does that. We do have one student athlete named Bracia Bird. She's an author. She's a freshman basketball player on our campus, and she's already an author, at age 18. Wrote the book, I think, at 16 or 17. So I would maybe email you and say, hey, would you be interested in doing a story? This is what she's done. And then, I wait for your response. And, you say no, then I say, okay, thank you very much. If you say yes, then I'll set it up like, we did before with Coach Bowser. So that it works both ways, but either way, I'm the middle person, in the interview.
That's amazing and very informative. Can you talk about, of course, your roles as a sports information director?
Oh man, I have several roles. Well, one thing about the sport, not just me specifically, but the position in general. Like I said, at a university our size, you wear a lot of different hats. Like I said before, I cover 12 sports. Not only do I cover the 12 sports, I market the 12 sports. That meaning that, like we were talking about earlier, if there's a story idea to be pitched, I will, that's my job is to pitch, story ideas about our student athletes, being seen in a positive light. So, I'm sort of a pitch man, as far as, information. I'm the media contact person if the media has interest in doing a story. But my job comes in two other parts too. It comes, the marketing part is one, which also includes posters, schedule cards, information. I update the website, and that's all go is part of marketing. Like I say, in addition to the schedule cards and the posters, I also do stats. That's the other part of it. That's the other phase of the position, doing stats. And then game operations. That's all wrapped in the sports information. So, we're responsible for turning stats into the CIAA and the NCAA. We're responsible for providing stats at games, at home games, at all home games and matches. The home sports information director is responsible for providing stats. If we do not have any stats, from a game or a match, we'll be fine. So that's my responsibility, to provide the stats during the games. That means either I, myself, or someone that's helping me, maybe a student intern or maybe a work study student, they're keeping the stats during the game. So at the end of the game, we're responsible for the sports information director is responsible for passing the stats out, during the game, sending the game file to the visiting SID who may not have attended the game, writing the press release after the game to the media. And now it used to be you just write the release and send it to the media, but now you write the release and then you put it on the website as well. And then, now with the advent now of social media, see now you got graphics. That's another part of marketing that you do. Instagram, like I say, YouTube. Now, we haven't gotten to that point where we're doing YouTube videos, but since the last couple of years through a contract with the CIAA conference, we're live streaming our home games now. So that's another added responsibility for the sports information director. And that's not even talking about, as far as my position, that's all during the game. That's all going on during the game, but that's not even counting the setup for the game, whether it's football, basketball, softball, volleyball, and the breakdown. We not only is it the sports information director's responsibility to handle the marketing end of it and statistical end of it, there's also that game operations where you have to set up, break down any questions, any concerns in the media area. The sports information director takes care of that. The official may, let's say the official doesn't needs to have her ankle wrapped. The sports information director is the one who normally shows her where to get it wrapped or where they dress, or let's say, you have the PA announcer, he needs the starting lineups, stuff like that. Just, we have a neutral observer that comes to the game, make sure that he's seated and situated. You may have media to come to the game, have to take care of the media. Sometimes, where, like I say, it's optional to feed them, but I try to feed the scores table and the media table. Try to, because especially a doubleheader basketball game, that's a long day. It's about 4 or 5 hour day. So try to feed them. You got to kind of keep the people that's working for you happy. So you have to factor all that in, on a game day for a sports information director, in addition to the other parts of the job. So, and I'm just scratching the surface on the operations end, but that's basically it. My job just comes in those three phases. It comes in the marketing, stats, and game operations.
That's amazing.
I know it's a lot, but that's pretty much the job in a nutshell.
As you talked about, of course, working with newspapers and stuff. What is that relationship like, of course, on a college level, working with a local paper like that?
Well, I tell you, we're in a it's very interesting because the triangle market, the Raleigh-Durham market is very competitive. Of course, you have ACC sports, ACC basketball, you have Hurricanes, and high school sports. High school sports gets a lot of coverage in the triangle. So it's important, as sports information director, it's important to try to keep St. Augustine's University, keep them out in the forefront as well, because there's so much competition. So that's where using your contacts as far as people that you've worked with in the business as a reporter, staying in contact with them, let them know what's going on. The sports information director is basically responsible to let the media know what's going on, because the media is not coming to St. Augustine's University to a football practice every day like they may come to NC State or Carolina. It's my job to inform the media of all the positive things that's taking place on campus, because for that very reason, because they're not coming here, so I got to bring it to them. And like I said, pitching stories to me is a big part of the job, because if I don't tell what's going on campus, then the media won't know. They won't know unless there's something big that happens. But other than that, they won't know what's going on campus, because you got to figure, for the media, there's only so many hours during the day. They're spending the majority of those hours with ACC schools and with the Carolina Hurricanes and with the Carolina Panthers. And like and high school gets high school gets probably more coverage than people realize.
Can you talk about, of course, what happens whenever small podcasts such as myself messages coaches, that sometimes coaches don't know who we are just because we're small? What happens in that instance?
Well, what happens at St. Augustine's, I can't speak on the other schools, but what happens here is that they'll bring it to my attention and they'll ask about it. And then if I say, well, I hadn't heard about it, but my job is to go and research information. So once I research the information and the coaches get a better idea and I get a better idea of the podcast, then we'll make that decision whether to go ahead and agree to the interview or just decline it. But it just depends on the key word is credibility. That's the key word. Now, like I said, there are a lot of podcasts out here, and honestly, that was, there was a period where when the podcast first started, there was the big question of are they, it's not traditional media, so are they credible? That was the big question. With traditional media, you can look up, you can, see their byline, or you can look on their website, or you can call the office and see if the person works there. I mean, there is a lot easier way to find out, if a person is credible working for a TV station or for a newspaper. 9 times out of 10, if they're working there, you just know they're credible. But then you got a podcast and you're not familiar with the person and you're not familiar with the name and you don't know anything about it, then it takes a little bit more homework to find out about, what is it, whether this person now is just is he really trying to tell news or talk about sports or, promote sports, or is this person really just trying to get a pass to get in the game? Because that's what happens a lot of times. You find out that some of the folks, I've had a guy, and I tell you this much, I've had an experience where, I've had a guy call me and told me he had a podcast, but then he comes to the game and he has nothing. He doesn't have a camera. He doesn't, he don't even have a pen and a pad. He doesn't even use his cell phone. You take pictures of video or anything. He just in the stands sitting, watching the game. And see, that tells me right there, that person just used that he just used that saying that he had a podcast just to get a free pass. And that's what you got to watch out for. So a lot of times what coaches will do, the process is they'll alert me to it because they're not going to do an interview without letting me know. So they'll alert me to it, and then I'll check on it and see if the podcast is credible. We're going to do the research before we decide whether to do the interview or not.
Can you talk about, of course, during the interview, what goes and what can't go whenever coaches talk about like things?
Well, for the most part, unless there's a big situation on campus, like a firing, a hiring, to that, I say a firing. What normally what we'll do is the coach and I talk first, and we'll decide what we'll get on the same page as far as what to talk about and what not to talk about. And the reason why, because for the most part, I'll never tell a coach or a student athlete what to say and what not to say. I believe in freedom of speech, but I'll recommend it. I won't say don't say that. I'll say, well, you may not want to say this. You may want to say this. You may want to insinuate this point, and you may not want to talk about this point. I'll never tell them don't say it. I'll just let them know it's probably best not to say it, or it's best to say it. So we'll talk about it. And usually before, especially if most coaches have interview experience, and I don't have to talk to some coaches more than others. The student athletes are the ones that I really have to talk to, because like I said, on our level, they do not get interviewed as much. So it's a new experience for them, and they may or may not know how to conduct themselves in front of the camera. So I really talk to the student athletes more so than the coaches. A lot of our coaches, they verse pretty much. I don't really have to tell them a whole lot because they already have experience talking in front of a microphone or talking, on a podcast. But we'll talk about it. If it's a controversial topic, we'll definitely talk about it, because at that point, we got to make sure that the message that we're sending out is equal to the message with the university. So you can't have one person saying one thing and one person saying another thing. In that case, everybody's got to say the same. It's got to be the same message, throughout the university. And honestly, when it's a issue when it's a big story, truth be told, usually there's only one person talking. And more likely than not, it'll be the media relations person, just to keep it one message.
Can you talk about, of course, whenever it comes to NCAA recruitment rules and stuff, whenever coaches come on, like how in deep can they go into the recruitment process and the official visit process?
Well, and again, they know more about that than me. So there are certain things now be a really, like, if you ever get the chance to talk to Coach Bowser, he could answer that probably better than I can. But they can probably tell you what I do know is if they haven't signed anybody, they can't talk about that person. They can't talk about that student athlete. As far as once they sign, then he probably can give you some details about the player and how he'll fit within the program. But as far as I know, and I may be wrong, but I got a good feeling on this. If a student athlete haven't signed, coaches is off limits as far as talking about that student athlete. So anytime you hear a coach talking about a student athlete, more than likely they've already signed with the university. And then they can tell you about it.
What about whenever it comes to official visit? Can you talk about a little bit about, can they talk about like the process of the official visit?
They can tell you, they can talk about the recruiting process and how it works. They can tell you, give you general information about it. They just can't give you specific information about it.
What advice would you give upcoming future sports information directors looking to get into the industry?
Well, first of all, I would say you gotta love sports. You gotta love sports. You gotta learn how to live it and breathe it. Number one, you gotta love sports because I mean that's gonna be your job. And I would say this: the job a lot of times requires working more than 8 hours a day. You can pretty much cancel if you got plans. You can cancel nights and weekends because you're gonna be working. But if you're a type of person who loves athletics, then that's your thing. Then hey, you're in heaven. That'll be the first thing. Second thing I would say is what I mentioned earlier about the hours. Just be ready to work. Be ready to work. You're gonna put in some hours. You're gonna put in some long hours, but be ready to work. As we would say, be ready to grind. The third thing, which I think would be very important, is if you're in college, I would say go to your sports information director and ask them, tell them that, hey, I'm interested in sports information. Is there anything I can do to help? Can I, be a part, of helping out the sports information office? And I'm gonna tell you, 10 times out of 10, that the SID gonna say yes. I got stuff for you to do. There's always something to do for a sports information director. So I would say once you do that, then that'll get your foot in to seeing how the business operates without the pressure being on you. So there's been several students, several SIDs who started as students, and they just sort of worked their way up and they learned the business. And there's always, and I can say this, whether the economy is up or down, there's always a job in sports information. There's always going to be a job in sports, and I can tell you that it's the profession is job security. You can find a job. There's a ton of schools, and there is always positions open for sports information.
That's so amazing. Where can my listeners find you at on social media, of course, and Saint Augustine Athletics at?
Well, I'm on. You can find me on the Saint Augustine University website. It is SAINT. It's SaintAugFalcons.com. SAINTAUGFALCONS.com. That's our website. Our Twitter handle is SAU Capital Falcons, and Instagram is SAU Athletics, SAU-Athletics.
Thank you again, Anthony, for your interview, and best of luck in your future as a sports information director.
Brandon, man, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Anthony, for your interview, and best of luck.
All right, thank you, Brandon. See you later.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.